I'm the doctor. My name's Cindy, and that's the coach. His name is Brett, and he knows far more about coaching. Probably has forgotten more about coaching than I've ever remembered. So he will be chiming in and giving some very practical information on how do you motivate youth. And we've joked about that, right? I mean, we can, I guess some people think that the best way to do that is to threaten them. I personally don't think that that always works, or it only will work for a brief moment in time. So what we really want to do is to motivate youth to motivate themselves. Because if you're motivating yourself, you're far more likely to be able to sustain that far into your life. So we are going to talk about motivating youth. We're glad that you're here and you're joining us. Some of you may already be on summer break. If you are, that's awesome. Or even more likely, if you work in an expanded learning program, you may have had your one day off and now are into summer, because we also have 30 extra days if you are in California and you receive ELOP, or Expanded Learning Opportunity Program dollars, then you have to run an extra 30 days. So you have 180 school days, and then you have 30 extra days. Now, those can be on the weekend or during intersession, but usually at least 20 of them are in the summer. So you may be getting started with that. One of the people that we work really closely with at Consult for Kids, school was out last Wednesday, and summer program started on Thursday. So they didn't even have a break. Whereas others, school was out on Thursday and they had Friday and Monday to prepare. So everybody's done it a little differently. But if wherever you are in that mix, welcome. Thank you for hanging in into the hours, the wee hours. No, it's not, but from 6 o'clock to 7, we appreciate it. And if you were in California, you may have experienced a little rain today. We got a little bit here in Kern County, which was a huge surprise, and I think it's heading south. So that should bring everybody up to date. So what we're going to do is talk about motivating youth. And just before we start on that topic, you know, the difference between motivation and manipulation is your intent. I can do the exact same thing to motivate you and manipulate you. But if I'm trying to manipulate you, it's for my good so that I win. And I quite frankly don't care if you do or not. But when we're motivating, we're inspiring, we're encouraging, we're influencing to a degree, but we allow the other person to make the final call, and we support them whichever way it goes. So if you ever think about those words and get them a little confused, it's what goes on in your head, not the action so much. And so just wanted to kind of set the stage, because motivation is you being a positive role model and mentor, offering advice if you're asked for advice, otherwise waiting with them and helping them to see all the options, because there are usually many. So Robert, all that being said, Brett, do you want to say hello to the group?
Well, yeah, not just hello, but just a few comments on that as you were talking and just in general. So first of all, it's tough, right? Because motivation, primarily, if it's going to, be sustainable, comes internally. Now, that being said, you can motivate somebody for a short period of time, which I'm sure will come up with several of the questions today. And then also on top of that, too, as you were talking, I was just thinking, where does that stem from? Where does that come from? Is that from DNA? Is that from your environment? Is that from circumstances? Is that from, a smoothie and blending all of that together? Where does that really come from? And it kind of runs the parallel with, are leaders born? Are they created and made? Or is there a combination of both? So that, I think that'll be pretty interesting over the next hour on how that kind of plays out.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good insight. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Our first question is, what are the key factors that motivate youth?
So I think there's a couple things. I can't speak for anybody else other than myself, but since I've been about 2 or 3, I really do not appreciate it when somebody tells me what to do and how to do it. I don't like it. And I tend to, even if it's a great idea, sometimes I'll pass on it. So I think autonomy is important. I think people are motivated not so much by the task, but the ability to figure out how to approach it themselves, right? So that we all have styles. And when you can approach it in your style and you have autonomy and you have agency over that, I think that that helps to be motivating. And that when Brett was speaking about coming from internal, that's intrinsic motivation. Now, we all need extrinsic motivation. We all go to work because we get paid, right? And that's part of it. But if that's the only reason you go, then you'll do the bare minimum to get by. So when you're intrinsically motivated, when it comes from inside you, and you have autonomy to express yourself and to do work in a way that makes sense to you, I think that that's important. By the same token, I also think it's important that you can be motivated by being a part of something bigger than yourself. And so when you are a part of something bigger than yourself, you may not get to do it just exactly your way, and you don't have to like every single thing. But what you can do is realize that it's bigger than me. It's going to have an impact far beyond. So in my career, I started out as a classroom teacher, and I would influence and impact 30 kids. And every year I could impact the 30 or 32 or 28, whichever it was that I had. But when I moved out of that role as a classroom teacher, what happened is that my classroom expanded. Now, I had to stop doing everything exactly the way I wanted to because I wasn't controlling those four walls anymore. But the impact I had was larger because the classroom was larger. And then I became a principal, so the classroom became even larger. And now when we work up and down the state of California, our classroom is even bigger. So I think that you have to realize that while you want to be motivated to do things your way and you want autonomy, you also have to consider what's good and what's best overall. And it may not just be your way. So I think that's important. And then I think the other thing I would say before I pass this off to you, Brett, is that one of the things that thrills me most when I walk an expanded learning site is one of two things, and it comes from kids. Both of them come from kids. One of them is when a kid says, I don't want to go home. I want to stay here. This is, I need to be here. This is where I want to be. Mom, can you come and pick me back up in an hour? Right? That's huge. What a testimonial that is for a strong program. And the other thing is when a kid can actually articulate that I belong here. I belong in this space. It feels good to me. I'm accepted. I'm valued, and I belong here. So just know that for me, it's both of those. It's giving people agency and yet helping them to mature to understand that agency sometimes needs to incorporate others, to be intrinsically motivated, and then also to just belong in that place. So I'll push that to you, Brett.
Well, there's a lot of good nuggets there that you said, and hopefully I can expand and come up with a few others as well. But I'll start with Van Gogh, right? So you give him this canvas, and he's going to paint that canvas. So what motivates him is that he enjoys obviously painting or being an artist. And so we have a thing that we call World's Wonder. What can you be the best in the world at? What do you have that is this art, this talent, this God-giving or whatever your modus operandi is, these strengths, these gifts, these talents, and different things of that nature. Now we happen to call that art, no pun intended, with Van Gogh. And then you have the science part of it, which are all these systems and structures. And then you have desire, right, which is this part of motivation that we don't really know where it's at, right? I mean, you can have short-term desire if you're 20 feet away from the side of the pool and you're extremely tired and you have to get there. You're going to be pretty motivated to get to the side. So you're going to start flailing your arms and legs to be able to get to the side, because obviously nobody wants to go into the water. But then there's this longer term, and I think that if you can put the purpose and the passion, which you talked about, you had mentioned that to me early in my career, I say early in my entrepreneurial career or my business career, I was struggling a little bit, and you said, look, your purpose and passion in helping people has never changed, but it's just your classroom. And you just mentioned that earlier, 16 special day kids and one adult. Then it was, 100, or actually it's closer to 1,000. It was 150 kids per period. We had about 7 periods, so 1,000 PE kids. And then there were 4 adults. And then when I became the site coordinator, I had 16 adults, and we served over 500 youth. And then when I became the program manager, obviously that was like 10,000 youth. We had 223 employees. And then since then, as Gma mentioned, we have close to 50 million youth that we've helped, and 10 million adults, right? So, but the classroom changed, but not the motivation, not the purpose. Another one that I would say is that so my old PE buddy, so we had a lot of time to talk because there was 5 to 7 minutes before period, there was 5 to 7 minutes after. Then we would get them lined up, and then we'd take roll, and then we'd get them on a quick jog to warm them up. We'd talk some more, blah blah. And even now, and neither one of us have taught for whatever 15 or 20 years. We have different careers. We can come back today, and it always comes back to work. So if you tie the world's wonder and back to what you're great at, that's going to help you to to feel that self-worth and all of those different things that are important. And the bottom line is, look, we all want to perform, right? Van Gogh probably wasn't very, I don't know him, but he probably wasn't very good on the basketball field, but he was amazing in his canvas. So I think that if we can help the youth to find what they're great at and what they enjoy and what their purpose and passion is, probably that's going to be a lot of factors in motivating those youth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Next question is, how can I identify what motivates individual youth?
I think,
You're
oh,
going
go ahead.
to say what you always say: ask them, and then if they
Yeah.
don't know, start introducing them to stuff, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that it's always interesting to me how adults sit around and try and figure it out, right? When they're right there. I was thinking after you had said this about Van Gogh, but I also heard this about Michelangelo. He said, "I can't not carve it." And I think for Van Gogh, even when he was miserable and inflicted his own pain by cutting off his ear, right? He couldn't not paint. He was compelled. And that's when you know that the person's motivated. Even if it would be good for them to stop, they can't stop. They can't not do this thing because it's so ingrained in them. It's so intense. It's so what they need to do. So I like to ask people, and I always expect when I ask youth, the younger they are, for them to not really have an answer because nobody really ever asks them questions. Everybody's really busy telling them what to do and how to do it and when to do it and, directing and telling. But I think it starts with asking questions, but it also starts by observing. So if you would have observed me as a kid, you would have seen certain things that I love to do and other things, not so much, right? Now, it wasn't that I couldn't do them, but I didn't do them very well. And it wasn't something that really floated my boat that I went, oh yeah, no, I need to do that. So I think that you have to observe kids and you have to watch them and you have to talk with them and you need to ask them about their feelings. So before I pitch it to you, Brett, I do want to share this one story. When I was a principal, I was out on the grounds and there was a 4th grade boy sitting, reading under a tree. And I said to him, wow, you must love to read. And he goes, no, I hate reading. And I'm thinking, okay. And I said to him, all right, well, tell me about your book. He said, oh, it's the greatest book I've ever had. It's about this, this, and this. And he's all excited about this book. And so I realized that somewhere in there, we were not communicating because I was thinking if you like this book and you're sitting here during recess, you must like reading. Okay. So I said to him, I said, I'm confused. I'm confused because you're choosing to read this book, but you tell me you don't like reading. He said, oh, I love my book. He said, reading's when you have to sit at the table with the teacher, and I don't like that at all. Okay. So if a kid answers you, and yet your observation tells you that that answer is wacky, it's like, whoa, that does not make sense. You need to ask more questions so you can find out what their words mean to them, not what they mean to you, but what they mean to them. And then you can go, oh, okay, I get it. You like to read books, you like to, pick ones that you enjoy. What you don't like is the instruction at the table. And I understand that. So I would just encourage you you observe and you watch, and then you talk to them, and you work to make sure that those are congruent, that they're not going like this, right? That they're congruent. Because if they're not, something's amiss. So now I'll switch it to you.
Yeah, I mean, me, for example, I love learning and asking questions and being inquisitive and investigate. I did not like school. I did not like traditional school. I wish we had after school back then, which we did. It was called sports. And that's why I love sports so much, because you're always trying to figure out different things. A lot of times people think sports isn't a big deal. No, it is a big deal, because you're having to make in the moment decisions very quickly as a coach, as an athlete, so on and so forth. The other thing that kind of came to mind when you were talking is age appropriateness. So for me, I was always able to ask the kids, because I did work with some younger kids for a very short period of time, as they called me kindergarten cop. But mainly I worked with middle school kids and high school kids as I was coaching them. And so, to me, it's a different kind of mindset, because at least at some level, you would hope that they have been asked those questions, or they've at least thought about those things. And so you could ask them, whereas the younger kids, they're like, what? Like, that's the most novel thing ever. You're asking for my opinion. So I think age appropriateness is very important. The other thing is that, so we have this thing we play, King and Queen of the World. So I already have a list of things that I think, on what might motivate an individual kid, or a small group, or a team, or the whole class, or whatever. But that doesn't mean that I'm right. And so then I'm always observing. It's almost like triangulating data, right? And so I'm always looking and seeing. I'm going, let me look at their behaviors during the activities. Do they seem engaged? Do they seem enthusiastic? Do they seem like that this is fun? Do they, those types of things. And I think when you put all of these things together, so you ask them, you're observing, you've already thought what you think, and you kind of triangulate that data. I think ultimately you'll figure it out. And yeah, it is easier with the older kids a lot of times, but not always, right? I knew what I wanted to do from the time I was a little boy. I wanted to coach and teach, so it was easy for me. Whereas my wife, she just kind of fell into it with kids. Her first job through my mom happened to be daycare right at our school district. And now my wife runs the daycares. Who would have ever thought? So I think that, we have to understand the continuum and the spectrum of how vast that could be, from somebody who knows from the time I was probably 7, 8, 9 years old, because my mom used to take me and I'd watch her and I'd marvel at how she'd do lesson plans and how she would teach. And so even though I didn't want to teach math or reading and different things of that nature, I was able to do that through intramurals. As a youngster, I had my lesson plan. It was called the playbook, right? And so, I was able to translate that from what she was doing to what I needed to do. But in the end, I just think that everybody identifies with something. And so find that world's wonder for them. And it doesn't have to be, they have to be the greatest in the world. Maybe it's just something they love. But if you can put the two together, that becomes extremely powerful.
Absolutely. Right. And you don't have to do the carrot and the stick, right? Where you keep the carrot in front of them so they keep moving forward, because they want to move forward.
Yeah, and sometimes that's good, right? Sometimes money motivates them, right? But if
Right.
that's the only way you're motivated, there's going to be a problem.
Yeah. Yep. For sure. Okay, Robert.
Our next question is, how can I use rewards to encourage positive behavior?
I think that we want to avoid M&Ms, right? That you do this and I give you an M&M every time, like we train dogs and things to do that. But I also think that if I took away your paycheck, you would stop going to work, right? You're motivated to get your paycheck. So how can I motivate you and use that extrinsic piece until the intrinsic piece has settled? And so I think that when we use rewards, it doesn't have to be financial. It doesn't have to be something that costs you something. It could be, maybe for some kids, it would be the opportunity to lead the debrief. It might be the opportunity to MC the awards assembly. It might be the opportunity to be the ambassador and take a visitor around the school and talk to them. I think that we tend to think of M&Ms, right? Or 13th place trophies. I don't think we need to do that. I think that we need to find things that will help them develop an intrinsic motivation. A cookie is an extrinsic motivation. Now, I'm not saying don't ever do a cookie. That's not what I'm saying. But if that's the only thing you're doing, it's like Pavlov's dog, right? I've taught you how to do this, and here's your reward. Now do it again, and here's your reward. And what I'm really doing is enabling you and making you rely on me to motivate you. And ultimately, I want to pass off to you the ability to motivate yourself. So I think I think we need to think about what rewards look like. And I think they need to be meaningful to each child. For some kids, making the announcement at the assembly would be the last thing they want to do. But what they might love to do is be the greeter. So we need to figure that out. But I would say that that those non-material rewards are really important. And yet it's really efficient to give a piece of candy, right? You can just dole them out much easier. But to do those praises and really help them, I think looks different than that. And encouraging their interest, I think, is important. So, Coach, what do you have to say?
Well, I'll start with, the biggest mantra that I always have is that when you're working with youth, it's the practicing ground for the real world. In the real world, we are rewarded for our behaviors, but also in the real world, we do nice things for people because we should do that based off of overall humanity. So when I was a kid, I don't do it anymore, which I should, but if I saw a lady who was, doing her own tire or something, back in the day, that was not appropriate as far as I was concerned. So I would stop whatever I was doing, I'd pull over and I'd get out of the car and I would jack up the car and I would change her tire for her, right? Or if it was a young kid even or whatever. And so I don't do that anymore because I don't have the time or I choose not to, I guess. But either direction, we don't want it to always be like you said. And I was cracking up when you said M&M's because my first thought, and I don't remember where we learned this from, but I think you and I listened to like the same person, but it was talking about the dog and the bell and how they would do that. And so they were also talking about, this is not funny, but it's sad funny, right? That the kid, they were trying to teach him to pee in the toilet. And so they would give him an M&M every time that they would go to the restroom. Well, then this kid, which had no more fluids in their system, was sitting by the toilet just trying to go so bad to get this M&M. And that's where you know that you've went overboard, right? Also, I think you need to watch the age appropriateness, right? Because what you want is maybe to start with the external, but in the end, it should all be internal or intrinsic, right? That's how we want people to be motivated. And so we may start with these things out here, but if you go too much, you're going to have the kid at the toilet who's trying to pee and has no fluids in him to pee. That's ridiculous. That means you did not do your job very well. So I think that there's a gradual shift from the external to the internals. I think there's also that vertical look of age appropriateness and what that would be. And then number three, don't assume that you know what that reward should be. Because, for some people it's broccoli. That's not for me, as you can tell with my belly, but for some people it's broccoli. For some people it's time, right? Like just getting the gift of time. That's their reward. For some people it's that you purchase a book for them. I mean, right? So don't just assume play king and queen of the world, but then ask them, and if they don't know it first, have them, give them some time to be able to think about it.
Absolutely. Asking them is such an easy thing, but we just so don't do it. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Yes. How can I teach youth to find intrinsic motivation?
I don't know that you can teach them that, but I think you can have them experience it and then discuss it, if that makes sense. If you haven't felt the joy of accomplishment, then you don't know what that feels like. And so it's really hard to try and talk that through. But if you find, even with the smallest of children, if you find something that they'd like to do and they're successful, and you say to them, how does that feel to you? And they're joyous and they're happy and they're singing, they're dancing, whatever, you can start to talk to them about how that feels and how that feels to you when you accomplish something. And then as they develop and get older, you talk about how that feeling that you have of like, yay, yippee, becomes your motivator. That's what you pull on. And so, yes, there are going to be a list of things that you would really rather not do. Thank you very much. But you do them anyway, because it's all part of being a part of a family or being a good human. But the thing that motivates you is the thing that brings you that same joy that you felt as a child. So I think that motivation has to be felt first, and how that feels and where you feel it in your body and how long it lasts and all those things. And then put language and words to it so they can understand it. So Brett, I'll pitch that to you.
Well, I think about, the couple people that just really come to mind since we've been doing this podcast. So, we gave the ability for a gal to do the interviews with us. She was a little fifth grade girl, and she wound up running the HR department for a Fortune 500 company, or the dancer girl who wound up, being a professional dancer. And so if we don't give them opportunities to find what can be intrinsic for them, because that girl would have danced till her feet bled, and the other girl would have done HR stuff until she passed out, because that was who she was. That just wasn't what they did. That's who they were. That was their life. That was their passion. That was their purpose. That was all built into the smoothie. And so I think that we just want to give a variety of choices to people, because, as an example, you had us get into dance and get into music. And I'm very grateful for that, because now I can sing in church, whereas beforehand I'd have probably been too nervous to sing. And am I a great singer? No, I'm not. Gma can sing like an angel. I sing like, I don't know, a shoe, but I can, carry enough of a tune where it's not embarrassing. Or like dancing, we have several weddings that we're going to be going to. And so, I'm able to dance with my wife, who thinks she's on Dance Fever when she goes to anything that plays music, right? She loves it to death. So I'm glad that I can dance with her enough to not look like a fool or whatever. So was that intrinsically motivating for me at the time? No. Is it something that I overly enjoy? No. But I enjoy seeing the smile on my wife's face when she gets to do her Dance Fever, because she loves to dance. So I think that intrinsic motivation can be tricky, as you stated earlier, but I think that it can be there, and it can be intrinsic for different reasons. It doesn't always have to be about me. It can be the joy for others, And not that not that I'm gonna go out and dance, 400 hours a day, but I can do it at certain times. But then if I can find what motivates me, as an example, I'm going through a bunch of cards. As you can see, I have a bunch. And so I don't know how intrinsically motivated I am. There's so many cards I have. I'm going through them, but it's the thrill of the hunt, right? And it's intrinsic because obviously there's nobody else who cares. Nobody cares whether I go through these cards. The cards are in my garage. Nobody could give a rat's rear end. But for me, it's motivating because it's thrill of the hunt. I want to be able to uncover that diamond in the rough, that $100 million Mickey Mantle, or whatever it is, so to speak. So I think that's all of those things. And then the last one, celebrate the things, even if it's not necessarily what you would consider to be intrinsically, celebrate with them, high five them. I know we did that with our youngest when he gave something away for Burger King. And he even said to me the other day, hey, I talked to this girl the other day and asked her out. She told me no, but that's okay because you taught me at Burger King how to be intrinsically motivated to be able to run the parallel with handing this little gift, that you'd find in a Happy Meal or whatever the equivalent of Burger King is, to this person. And so now I can take that, and that was some intrinsic motivation because I wanted to date this girl or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's interesting as you grow, your motivation is seeing joy in the people you love. It is joy in seeing someone. I know we felt huge joy when the little girl said, before this, I didn't know I was a dancer, right? That made you just, oh, right? It was worth everything. Or when a child says, I don't want to go home, I want to stay here because this is so cool. So those are things that help us build that will to keep trying, to keep pushing forward, to keep doing our best, because we get those little paybacks that are really, really helpful and keep us intrinsically motivated, I think.
Well, and you
Over time.
instilled that in us, from day one, right? Because I've always been that way, and I don't think I just was born that way. So I think that as what we call these child champions with a Z, that that hopefully are on this podcast, to know that you can make that kind of difference. That maybe somebody doesn't have somebody like my mom, but you can be my mom for them, so to speak.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think everybody needs a person, right? And if
Everybody
that's
needs
you,
my
awesome.
mom. Everybody needs my mom. That's for sure.
All right. So, Robert, how many folks do we have on this call tonight?
Right now we have 8 people on live. We have 4 on YouTube, and then we have the other 4 on TikTok.
All right. So I want to say a special thank you because I know that this is the transition. If you're an expanded learning person, this is absolutely the transition into maybe longer hours as well as more programming, not the ability to take a breath, the ability to keep moving, keep on giving, and keep on motivating, and keep on really working and supporting kids. So thank you for that. We're glad that you're here and investing this hour with us. We appreciate it. And if you do have any questions or anything you'd like to ask, or a topic that you want to talk about, let us know in the chat. And we'll be happy to have that conversation as well. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Yes, our next question is, what activities help build confidence as a motivator?
The tasks that you can complete, right? I think that there are 3 R's of expanded learning, and those are relationships, relevance, and rigor. So I think if we want to have activities that will act as motivators, they need to have those 3 elements in them. I think that you need to be able to work with others. You need to be in relationship with others. You need to be able to work on projects, and maybe with lots of different people, but it needs to be collaborative, a group effort. I think as humans, we are social. And so being sure that our activities, our social, can be motivating. The second part is relevance. And that's huge. And the older you get, the more important that is. There are things that people will say to me, "Oh, would you like to do blah, blah?" And I think, no, there's no part of me that wants to do that. And I won't even be gracious and say, "Oh, yeah, I'll try it." I am not eating snails. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it today. I'm not doing it tomorrow. I'm not doing it. So I'm not motivated in that way. But if it were relevant to me, if somebody said, "Will you go to cooking class with me? We're going to learn about something that I thought was really interesting to me," I would by all means go. So I would be motivated that way. So relevance matters. That's why you ask them. That's why you don't guess, you ask them. And then the third one is rigor. And I think that rigor matters. Rigor is hard enough that you have to push yourself, that you have to stretch, that you have to do more than you ever would have done before. You're learning and you're really stretching yourself. But it also has to be easy enough that when you stretch yourself, when you work hard, when you give it your best shot, you can feel some success. So I think that for me, in answer to that, confidence, right, are those three things: that it is relational, it's relevant to you, and it's rigorous. And I think that that's how you continue to motivate yourself to move forward. So, Coach,
Yeah, all.
it's you.
Right? The answer is all. All activities should be helping to build their confidence. This is the
Yep.
practicing ground for the real world, and you should have that. Begin with the end in mind and reverse engineer it. How do these everything that you do? Because if the activity does not become a learning opportunity, and that's going to help with confidence either way. Whether you do it right or wrong is irrelevant. It's what can you learn from it. And so, right, so that you can continue to stack those Legos, what we call stacking, and you continue to stack so that you will build your ultimate confidence. And then the intrinsic motivation is built into that. So every activity, all activities should be that way. The second thing I would say is you can go inch by inch at first, or we talk about the kid in the woodpile, step by step. Start with them as individuals and see how that they can be successful with an activity and build up that confidence and motivation. Then you can do it with a partner or a buddy. Then you can do a small group, and then you can do a little bit larger of a team or half of the class, and then do the whole class and bringing things together. Right? I mean, when my mom did Color Me Beautiful at the largest arena that we have in town, that I don't know seats 30,000 people, I'm pretty confident she didn't just throw them out on the stage and say go, right? And so what happened was that she did all these little small activities, and then she would start to cluster the activities together, and then ultimately you have the big routine. Same thing my son's going to have to do with his future wife. They're not going to just go, okay, go have the wedding. They're doing all these little activities along the way, which helps to build the confidence. And so we need to put them in place as the help to help them to be motivated to have that confidence. And if we stretch them too far, that's like going to the old Kmart, or now I guess Walmart, where you see the mom dragging the kid because they're going too fast. And then yet on the opposite end, if we're not pushing them to be the best that they can be to get some confidence, and we're just standing there. I see this happen where the dog walks the human every day when I go and walk. And it's like the dog's walking the human. If the dog stops, the human stops. And it's like, no, the tail doesn't wag the dog around here. So I think it's finding all of these combinations of things. But in the end, we want all activities to serve as confidence and motivating factors.
For sure. And I just want to say two things. Remember that fail, FAIL, is first attempt in learning. And the only thing that's holding you back is fear, which is false evidence appearing real. And if you can do that, if you can hang on to that, then you can be motivated and you can continue to work toward becoming the best version of yourself, which is all that any of us can hope for, in my opinion. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Okay, our next question is, how can I create a supportive environment to foster motivation?
I think you create that environment by being authentically you. I think that's important. And you don't have to like another person's style. Everybody doesn't have to love you. But if you're authentic and you're consistent, I think that that's helpful for kids. And I think that that helps an environment. And one of the things I just think is so important to understand, whether you're a classroom teacher or an expanded learning professional or a babysitter or the principal or the president of the United States, I don't care what your position is. Your job, in part, is to create a culture that allows people to become and then to celebrate that becoming. And when we fall short on that, we have people who do awful things. They don't feel like they belong. They stand outside. People are just objects to them. They don't connect, and that's a cultural thing. And I don't mean cultural like the family you were born into. I mean a culture that says every single human being is valuable and important, and we have things to learn from each and every one of them. And creating a culture where you can be you, as long as you understand that your right to be you stops where my right to be me begins. And to me, that's how that should work. And when I think about this supportive environment, one of the greatest uh, aspects, I guess is what I would say, of being a principal, of being a classroom teacher, of working with kids in the after school program, is that you're creating a culture. And you're either creating a culture in which kids will thrive or you're not. And that's important, that you figure out, authentically being you, how to create a culture where young people can thrive.
Yeah, I mean, you have to root for humanity, no matter, whether it's bad things have been happening to you, good things, or everywhere else. And so when you're rooting for humanity, then in my opinion, you have to start with relationships. So even though I root for humanity, I don't root for humanity in the same way that I root for my mom or Robert. And the reason is because I built a relationship with them, right? I built that relationship through time and care and belief, and then the two cheats, which we've talked about on previous podcasts. So I root for everybody, but I really root for people that I know because they're within my sphere, my proximity, so to speak. So root for humanity, but if I have a relationship with you, then that is going to create a supportive environment, right? Because these are people that you care about, that you love, that you deeply respect, that you're rooting for in a much different way than you might for somebody that's just on the street that you don't know. We'll still root for you, but not in the same way. And the creating of the environment, the supportive environment, starts to me with relationships. Number two, I think you have to provide the spaces for them to not only succeed but to fail and to get back on it. I mean, we throw a lot at Robert. We've thrown probably 30 professional positions of our 100 at him over the last year or so. And he's been with us for 5 years, but just doing one position. And then over the last year, he's done 30 positions, right? And that's not easy, but we try to provide a space for him to where he can succeed and grow and feel supported no matter what. And he'd be the first to tell you it's not always easy. It's not always Shangri-La, and that's okay too. Life's not Shangri-La, right? And I remember, I think I told people a while back, but I'll mention it again real quick. So I had a point guard, and I had not heard from her for like 25 years. She's a little seventh grade girl. Didn't say much. And she called me one day and she said, I hated your guts. And I said, well, good, get in line. Most people did hate me because I was hard on them. I was hard on the middle school kids, especially when we were in after school with the sports, because who cares about eighth grade basketball, right? They're going to do that for 2 months, but their life I knew would be forever. And I did believe from a very early age this is the practicing ground for the real world. And I used to tell them, what are you going to do when the chips are down? Everybody's great when when things are going well. I go, what are you going to do when your electricity bill goes out, or you just want to quit? And I said, we don't quit, blah blah blah. And so she called me in tears, and she said, I hated you, but I was one semester away from being a psychologist. And the voice in your head just kept ringing. We don't quit. And so she did it. And so now she's a psychologist, which means, as my mom says, the pebble in the water effect. How many kids, how many youth have we affected because, yeah, we were hard on them, but they knew we loved them and we cared about them. And we were trying to prepare them for what is a very difficult society. So to me, you create that supportive environment, which helps to foster the motivation by that creating a culture of excellence.
And isn't it interesting that after all those years, she was convicted to call and share that with you?
Yeah, and
Right.
you and I have been very fortunate. Your style is different than mine. I'm a lot more hardcore and more of an old school, coach or whatever. And you do it with a lot more kindness and sweetness than I do. But I would say that we have equal or close to equal effect in the end, and that's why when GMA says, style is just style, and not everybody's going to have the same style. And again, if you told my best buddy maybe you can't do that, he would maybe go on the tape like, oh man, I can't do that. If you told me that, I was going to prove you wrong, even if I didn't want to do it. So styles do matter, and that's what's great. And one of the things I think we got really right with K-12 education is that we went from the single teacher basically through middle school to where they've got to go to 7 different styles, and they have to learn in middle school how to deal with different teachers, because that's life, right? The guy at the grocery store is going to be different than the waitress at the local, restaurant, or blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. And to me, those are the practicing grounds that we need to help them with for whatever that real world will be.
Absolutely. Okay, Robert, you're up.
Okay, our next question is, how can I encourage youth to take ownership of their goals?
Ownership is an interesting concept. And I also think it's part of a continuum. And I think that the continuum doesn't start with ownership. I think that continuum starts with input. If I ask you, and I truly want to hear your answer, I'm not just asking you to be asking you, but I'm going to actively listen to you. And then I take that part of your input that I can do something with, and I let you know that I'm going to use that input. Or if I can't use it right now, I'm going to tell you that, right? But it starts with input, and input is before you do something. So I want to know what you think before I do this. What's your best thought? Then I think after you get input, then you actually do something, and then you ask kids for feedback. How was that? What did you like best? What are you undecided about, or you hate it? Right? How could we do it differently? You involve them and engage them in that, because I've now asked you before, and now I'm asking you to give me feedback after. And once you start doing that, what happens is buy-in. They go, you know what? I had some say in that. So I think I bought into that. It's still not ownership. Ownership is the next step where you say, here I stand. This is me. This is what I'm for. And I may have shared this already, but I was working with a group of people from LA, and one of them was, I know this will sound weird, but He was a physician who had retired and couldn't stand not working, so he went to work in the expanded learning program. And he loved it. He worked at a middle school. And he called me one day and he said, I finally saw it. And I'm thinking, saw what? Right? And I said, saw what? He said, I saw ownership. And he said, I didn't know that I would ever see it in these kids. And so he explained to me that this group of 8 kids in junior high decided to study for the spelling bee. Now, why they decided it, who knows? But they got together and he said, well, how might you want to do that? They gave him some input. Then he organized time around for them so that they could do that. And they gave him feedback. They made some corrections. And then they bought into it and they were doing that. But he said when ownership happened, the 8 of them were sitting there and someone came in a little breathless from outside and said, you got to come out and do this. It's so cool. It's the best activity we've ever done. And he said he watched them start to stand. And then they sat down and they said, no, we're studying for the spelling bee. We'll be out when we're finished. He said, that's ownership. Because there are all these other things that sound so cool, but I'm owning this decision and I'm going to take it all the way through to the end. So I think that ownership is at the end of a continuum. Input, feedback, buy-in, ultimately ownership. So that's what I would say. So Brett, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, we've created a lot of cycles and formulas and plugins and we've talked about touch points and whatever, and that's one of the ones that we have. We have what we call this ownership formula or cycle, whatever you want to be able to call it. And it does start with input, right? And so I always say, start with king and queen of the world if you're the adult or the child champion, just in case when you ask them a question about that, they don't know they don't know how to answer. You can say, what about, right? You don't want to say do this because then it's no good. But I think that we want to start with king and queen of the world, right? And then we state the objective of whatever it is that's trying to be accomplished. And then they're going to give that input, which is going to get them involved, which is going to get them to buy in, which ultimately is going to equal that ownership. And so I put that on the whiteboard when we're doing our leadership training or any trainings. Really, we go I plus I, plus BI equals O, and we ask them to guess, and of course they don't know, but then we tell them that, and they're like, oh, okay, great. So I think that if you bring the structures and the systems together, great things will happen. I know my wife, as experienced as she is, 34 years, she was struggling with something, and I said, well, honey, one of the formulas we have is this triangle. We call it the trifecta, and no matter where we go, it always comes down to one of these 3 things. It's either the mindset, it's usually the structures or the schematics, the systems, the process, procedures, or it's the people, right? It's one of those 3 things where the challenges are, or if it's something great that they're doing. It's either one of those 3, or if it's really great, it's usually all of those 3 coming together, so to speak. So I think that if you can plug into that formula that Gma talked about, it's critically important. I would also say celebrate the milestones, right? So when you begin with the end in mind, you reverse engineer it, or another way you say, here's the starting point, here's the end result. What are going to be those benchmarks and what are the blueprint? And then celebrate the little milestones along the way, because especially the younger they are, you want to do a lot of celebrations early, because it's hard for them to have a weak project when you're 2nd, 3rd grade, right? It can be a 2-day project is a lot for them or whatever. So I think it's being able to say that. And then the one thing I would add with what Gma said too is the during, right? So get their input beforehand and after, but also during, especially when it's their first time. Talk to them about how are they feeling, what are they thinking, what's going on in their brain. Share, stop, turn to your neighbor, talk, turn to 4 people and talk. Share out, let me get some feedback so that we might be able to, to change that or a different form of encouragement so that they can take that ownership of the ultimate goals. But to me, it's everything, right? You got to set a goal, begin with in mind, reverse engineer it, try it out, adjust along the way, celebrate the milestones and the good things. And if you don't know what the heck's going on, question it and try to push it to that like or that dislike.
Absolutely. No, for sure. I think that it's interesting that that sometimes we forget it's a process, right? It's got steps. There's a process, and that's the science. And then you'll add the art to it so that it's working for you. But there is a process that will take you to where you want to be. Okay, Robert, I think we have time for one more question.
Yes, our last question is, what strategies help youth overcome fear of failure?
Failing and getting up and failing and getting up and failing and getting up. Um, I think we have to celebrate failure. I think I'm getting an echo.
There you go,
Okay,
sorry.
that's all right. You know, if somebody fails, wonderful. Celebrate that. Ask them what they've learned from it. How are they going to change the behavior? What are they going to do differently? Because if you didn't have the failure, you wouldn't know something else to try. And I think what we do is we go, oh my word, you failed. No, failure only is real if you quit, if you stop, if you go, I'm done with it. So I can tell you I have failed at flag football because I'm not doing that anymore. But as long as I was trying, even though I had to grab children in order to pull the flags off because I was not very good at it, right? That was different. But the failure comes when you absolutely refuse to move forward. And so I think that it's okay to help kids understand that everything does not go perfectly. We do not win trophies for everything we do, but that doesn't mean we can't keep at it. And I think we've talked about Malcolm Gladwell before, but he writes books, right? And he's a great author, and he always says things that make you go, oh. And one of the things he says is that to be good at something, you have to have 10,000 hours of practice. And for most of us, we don't have 10,000 hours of practice in any one thing unless you are truly exceptional, right? The concert pianist has his or her 10,000 hours. Mahomes, whether you like him or not, has had his 10,000 hours of practice. So is Tom Brady, right? They have practiced enough that they are skilled enough to be exceptional. And so I just think that helping kids understand that you have to practice and it's okay to fail and you don't have to be afraid of it. The world will not fall apart if you fail. Fail, acknowledge it, learn from it, and move forward. So, Coach, you get
Yeah,
the
I mean, I
last
think
word.
it's ridiculous, right? Failure is ridiculous. There's no such thing as failure unless you don't start, right? If you start and then you stop, that doesn't mean you failed. That doesn't mean you didn't like it, or you weren't any good at it, or it wasn't your jam, or it wasn't your thing, or whatever. So we say try it once, right? I've tried broccoli, I've tried cauliflower, I've tried all those things. I'm not a big fan of those things, right? So I don't do them anymore, and that's okay too. You tried flag football, and it wasn't your thing. Sounds to me like you were cheating. I don't know if you're grabbing them,
It
but
was.
that's between you and them, right? But to me, I don't even like the word failure. The only way you're a failure if my youngest didn't go ask that kid to have his Burger King whatever Happy Meal toy, then that's a failure. But he did ask, and the kid turned him down. Big deal. But it helped him now to ask a girl that he'd really like to date. And she turned him down. But not everybody's going to turn you down. Somebody's going to say yes. Somebody's going to go, yes, I would like to date you or, try this out or whatever. Also, normalize it. Normalize failure. I told you I'd have everybody, even the best, spin in the shot till they fell down. And I go, is that failure? No, it's just facts. It's the fact of you spinning over and over and over again. You're going to slip. You're going to fall. You're going to get dizzy. You're going to try too hard and you're going to fall. right? And so big deal. So anybody that gets a little bit like hurt on that, I'm like, you're viewing it in the wrong manner, in my opinion. There is no such thing as failure as long as you start.
Absolutely. So, Robert, I think we are at 7 p.m.
Yes.
So just want to say thank you to those of you who tuned in. We appreciate it. We hope that you have a wonderful June, and we see you next Tuesday as well, because we plan to go right on through